Hello, everyone. Gonna give it a few minutes before we get started. Just another minute or two, maybe. Welcome to the research rundown for today. All right, so my name is Erica Eaves, and I'm one of the reference archivists in the research room here at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Just let everybody know that we will be having a Food for Thought event on Thursday, December 16th. It will be offered in person and virtually through our Facebook and our YouTube pages. All right, let's go ahead and try to get started. Again, this is our research rundown, and my name is Erica Eaves, and I'm presenting on the birth and death certificates today. They are for the history and the access of birth and death certificates. So, all right, so let's clear up one thing first. There are certificates and then there are records. Birth and death certificates are a legal government document, which is usually created at the county level. It's a specific type of a record, but it's just easier for me to keep them separated. So I just kind of encourage people to keep the idea of a birth certificate is different than birth records. Same with death certificates, different than death records. It's kind of one of those all thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs things. So, you know, certificates are a type of a record, but not all records are a certificate. So just kind of keep that in mind. So birth and death records are considered, you know, they're documents that are alternative to a birth certificate. So those are like family Bibles and obituaries and newspaper announcements and cemetery surveys that are usually conducted by like your local historical society, and they, you know, print those little books that we sometimes have in our archives, are like a headstone, or family letters can be a record as well. If it's usually if it's closer to the date of the event you want to cite, it's better, but family letters can be helpful, especially if they mention, hey, so and so's birthday is today and they turned 12. You know, that can be helpful, as long as they're right on their age. All right, let's start with the history of birth certificates. So birth certificates are a very modern document. And when I say modern, I mean they came into effect during the 20th century, or AKA the 1900s. Traditionally, birth and other vital information was collected and maintained only by families and sometimes religious institutions. So, you know, that's why there used to be family Bibles. I know my family doesn't keep a family Bible. I don't know if they ever did. If they did, I've never seen it. But, you know, family Bibles were used to track births, deaths, and marriages. And they can be a gold mine if you can find one. There's also baptismal and burial records that can be kept by local churches. Again, if you can find them, they're available. Or if you know where they are kept. Sometimes they're still with the church, or the church doesn't exist, and who knows where the records are. So, but those can also be, they can be kind of spotty. So in England, there were, you know, epidemics. We've all, you know, learned the history, the plague and all that stuff. And it was kind of from those events that the idea of kind of collecting vital records kind of sort of started taking root. In 1853, the United Kingdom decided, hey, you know, let's make a mandate where we start collecting all the birth records data on the national level. Unfortunately, it took several decades for them to kind of implement that idea, and even a little bit longer to really get full population participation. So just like any other government implemented ideas, they take a while to really take effect. So in the United States, it came from similar ideas, but kind of towards the idea of kind of handling the influx of all these European immigrants. And they were worried about public health issues. And so they thought maybe if we compile data and some vital statistics, we can kind of figure out what to do about this. So that's kind of where for the first kind of inklings kind of sort of came from. So, but the United States didn't start actually collecting any birth data until 1902 on the national level. And it was done through the Census Bureau. But it took a lot of time to work out those systems. The current system, as it is today, each state collects their own data and they report it to the federal government. And that didn't start until 1915. So again, it took a little while to get things going. And birth certificates as we know them today are not the same as when they first started. So they serve as your proof of identity, your citizenship status. They prove your age. They prove, who your parents are. They're an essential government document that you need to apply for a passport or get a driver's license, enroll in school. You usually have to give it when you get a job. So originally, these were just basic things that were kept for, statistics. How many babies are being born? Where are they being born? That kind of thing. All right, a little bit more. So again, in 1902, the Census Bureau was made a permanent agency, and they were tasked with the process of collecting birth data, along with all, the census stuff. They were like, okay, you guys get to collect the birth data now. But it wasn't until 1907 when the first actual standardized birth certificate application form was produced. So they were tasked with this data. They start telling the states to do this, and nobody knows what questions to ask. But in 1907, they finally get a standardized form, and there we go. This form goes through at least 12 revisions sent from between 1902 and today, and it's usually adding additional information or trying to get more information about the child and their parents and that kind of information. Each revision, and just being more details. Things get more detailed as time goes on. That just seems to be the norm. So in January of 1908, Alabama begins collecting birth data and producing their birth certificates for the births that are actually reported, which a doctor or a midwife were the ones that were pretty much in charge of doing this reporting to their local county government. Didn't go so well at first. By 1919, all the states at the time that were around at the time had birth records, but not all of them were reporting them to the federal government like they were supposed to. And many rural areas and people giving births away from hospitals were still very much unreported. It was just a chaos almost. These people are supposed to do this and they're just not doing it. Rural areas, it just took a lot longer to get things. It still does today. It takes a lot longer for things to get to rural areas. So by 1933, all the states, again, that were around at the time are finally now reporting all their birth data that they have, what's being reported to them, to the federal government. So it's finally working how the federal government wanted it to work, and it only took 30 years. And it's still a little iffy. August of 1935 is when the Social Security Act is signed into law by President Roosevelt. And so this act kind of gave the population a little bit of a kickstart. Not quite in 1935, but they kind of starts building up to when people are going to realize, hey, I need to be able to prove these things. when was I born? Who are my parents? What's my age? Am I a citizen? And this really takes hold after World War II begins and after the U.S. enters World War II. Many employers start asking for proof of citizenships, especially if you're working in the military field. If you're working in some sort of factory where you're building things for the military to use, you had to prove that you were a citizen of the United States in order to do that. And at that time, 1/3 of the adult population of the country who were eligible to work in factories or anywhere else that required such things, they couldn't prove their citizenship. They didn't have birth certificates. They were like, I was born in the U.S. I know I was born in the U.S., but I don't have any document that you will accept that proves that. So that's when people started like, oh, we really do need to kind of take care of this, and we need to make sure that our kids have birth certificates. So whenever my baby is born, I need to make sure that it gets a birth certificate so it doesn't have to go through this mess. So by 1946, Census Bureau stops collecting data. It gets transferred to the Office of Vital Statistics, which is now part of the CDC. And they are now in charge the Department of Health and Human Services. So they're now in charge of all that records and information. And so because of that, most birth certificates are located in each individual state's departments of health. All right, so let's switch gears for a little bit, and we're going to talk about death certificates. So these, again, are also a modern document. As we know them today, death certificates as a legal document, not created until the 20th century. Today, they are the only legal proof that someone has died. You have to have a death certificate to, cancel your grandmother's, phone service or something, or your mother's phone service. A relative that dies, you have to prove that they're dead, and the only way you can do that is with a death certificate. So. But previously, death certificates, proof that someone's dead, wasn't always needed. People just died. So it was regulated mostly to burial records that were usually kept by a religious institution, if that's where they were buried, in a religious cemetery, or whoever owned a cemetery, the town may have kept some sort of records, hopefully. But due to the rising public health concerns in the United Kingdom, they started very early on listing, tracking locations of outbreaks of fatal diseases and things like that. And they would post notices for people, hey, stay away from this area. This many, 7 people have died from the plague, that kind of thing. These lists were known as bills of mortality, and they began in the early 1500s. So talking way back, and they were originally just numbers of people and where they were. So they're not really helpful for finding when someone specific died, because they were just concerned about what they died of and where they were in order to warn people to stay away. But this is kind of the beginning of the idea of tracking death information. Later on, they'll start adding names of deceased people, as kind of people start moving around a little bit more and going different places, and keeping track of an individual person kind of starts becoming a little bit more necessary. So, and that's kind of ties in with how in the 1700s and the early 1800s, there's this drift towards a more scientific way of thinking and a less religious ideas of causes of death. Like thinking this person died because they were sinful, instead of, when actually they died because they had, tuberculosis. So there's those things. And so that kind of starts bringing things out of the just what did they die of and where were they, to who was this person, and what can we do, what do we need to do about that. So the names of the deceased kind of begin to appear as well. in that time period too, and start kind of leaning more towards the idea of death registers that you can usually find kind of at the county level. 1841, Massachusetts is the very first state to begin a statewide death registration. Again, it kind of takes a while for them to actually get it statewide and get everybody on board, and but that's one of the first occurrences in the United States. And then 1893, people are looking more, they're still looking at causes of death, and cause of death is going to remain important. It's still important today. So that's going to continue, but you get your first list of standardized causes of death, so you don't get, that the person was scared to death, though apparently that can happen. But I'm not a doctor, so don't ask me how this person died. But a little more standardization as to what different things are called. So that kind of helps as well. But in 1908, January of 1908, Alabama begins producing their death certificates. Again, for the deaths that are reported. So by the early 1900s, death certificates began to kind of gain importance as a form of identity and to prove that this specific person died. This is how they died. They're no longer here. Their bills need to go to somebody else, go to their heirs, kind of thing. So they gain importance, and their, Social Security, insurance companies, probate proceedings, things, those are the types of things that people start realizing, okay, I need to prove that this person's dead. And so they kind of need those things. One quick thing here, remember that death certificates are filed in the state where the person died. So this could be different from where they're buried. So I have ancestors that died in other states. One who died in Texas and is buried in Mississippi. Another one who died in Arizona and also is buried in Mississippi. So just keep in mind that a death certificate is not necessarily filed where the person is buried. It's filed in the state where they die, because that's the law. Okay, here is a cool map that I put together for myself because I'm a visual person. And so it shows the earliest dates for birth and death certificates, the government documents, that are for the southern states, because no need to do all of the states right now. we focus on Alabama, and then I provided some of the ones around us so that, because people travel and move and migrate. So you'll notice, again, the federal government starts this whole process in 1902. Texas was ahead of the game. They started in 1903. They got going real quick after the federal government, or maybe they had it in process a little bit before that, and then that was the year they just got it set up and going. Who knows? But other than that, Alabama is one of the first states in the South in 1908 to start collecting birth and death records and creating birth and death certificates. So each state, it was up to each state to get their own system set up and running. So that's why there's, Kentucky up there at 1911, and, Georgia 1919. I mean, what took them so long? We don't know. They just didn't start it. So each state is different, and there may be earlier forms of other types of birth and death records that are found in individual counties and municipalities and things within the state, but these are the earliest dates for birth and death certificates. And then I got all these dates from the CDC's Where to Write for Vital Records website, which is the link that I have down at the bottom of the page. These links are also in the comments section on Facebook and YouTube. So that's where I went, and I just clicked on each state, and I found their record. It gives you the dates and their explanations for all their different vital records and where you can find them. It tells you, who you need to go to. And again, most of these records are held in each state's Department of Health. Each individual state's Department of Health. Most of those records are there. Sometimes once they become public record, they'll transfer the original documents over to an archive, or they'll give an archive copies of the originals or something like that. But in the state of Alabama, we do not have any of that. So again, we're talking about access here. So let's do this. Alabama Department of Archives and History, we do not hold any original birth and death certificates, and we have absolutely no access to any birth certificates. Now, death certificates are a little another thing. We do have, when our Family Search affiliate library account is working, we have access, limited access to digitized death certificates from 1908 to 1974. These are death certificates that were digitized microfilmed previously, and then later allowed to be digitized and put on Family Search. And that's why we have some access to them. But only when our affiliate library account is working. Unfortunately, we are working with Family Search on getting that fixed. It's still not fixed. I checked this morning, but we are working on getting that fixed, and hopefully they will be able to access those death certificates again, because they were pretty handy to be able to get those. But otherwise, we have no original records and absolutely no access to any birth certificates. So all birth and death certificates, again, Vital Records Division of the Alabama Department of Public Health, and CDC is where you need to go if you're looking for other states. They can give you information about where those are held in other states. All right, so accessing birth certificates held by the Department of Public Health can be a little tricky sometimes because, again, we have no access to them here at the archives. They are restricted by law for 125 years. So state law says, I'm sorry, you can't have it, unless you are the person who's named on the certificate, you are the parent or legal guardian, you're the spouse, the child, the sibling, or a legal representative of one of those previously mentioned persons. So restricted for 125 years, that's a long time, but I guess they figured, not a lot of people live to be 100, but just in case, we want to make sure we protect their privacy. So 125 years it is. That means the first certificates produced in Alabama in 1908 will become public record after 2033. So no birth certificates are public record yet in the state of Alabama. So just keep that in mind when you need to try and get a birth certificate. You need to be one of these people named here in the list in order to get it. Again, you can't be a grandchild, unfortunately. You have to be a child or a sibling. So that can make things difficult. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait, and hopefully your heirs can get access to it, whatever your grandparents' records, if you don't live long enough to have access to it yourself. You'll have to contact the Department of Public Health. I've got their address and phone number here and their link to their website. You'll have to pay them a fee to get it, of course. And you need to make sure that you have the exact information that's on the birth certificate, the exact same spelling that's on the birth certificate, and the correct date on the birth certificate. Of course, you're thinking, well, I don't have the birth certificate, so I don't know what those are. Unfortunately, that's just how they do things over there at the Department of Public Health and their Vital Statistics Department. Everything has to be exact, or they tell you they don't have it. So in some cases, we might be able to help find you some alternative records here at the archives, like some of those birth registers or things like that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those records here in a little bit. Let's talk real quick about accessing death certificates. These are a little bit more easy to get a hold of. They're held by the Department of Public Health again, and we have some limited access between 1908 and 1974. And that's only when our affiliate library status is working for FamilySearch.com. So again, we're really working on getting that fixed. And hopefully Family Search will give us our access back. So death certificates are only restricted by law for 25 years. And so these years are set by each state. So 25 years in the state of Alabama. I've seen some states where it's 50 years. So again, you want to check with each of your states that you might be trying to get information from as to how long they're restricted before they become public access, if you can't get them when they're restricted. So check with your states. So in Alabama, death certificates between 1908 and 1996 should all be public record now, except for, as of today's date, should all be public record. December 7th, 1996 is not ready yet. You can get those tomorrow, I think. So again, you'd have to pay a fee for the Department of Health. You have to be the parent, a spouse, a child, a sibling. Now, you can be a grandchild of someone for their death certificate, but only if you're trying to demonstrate some sort of entitlement. And you can have a legal representative of the family or the estate can request death certificates as well. So, and an informant. If you were the informant for someone's death certificate, you can also request a copy. And that's if it's less than 25 years old. So anything from 1997 and to today, you can't get. They're too new. They're still within the 25 years restriction. Okay, so let's talk about some of the records that we do have at the archives that might be helpful to you. So our county records on microfilm database is where you're going to want to go. These records are what has been microfilmed at county courthouses, and then we now have copies of that microfilm. So this database is just a list of the types of documents and records that we have on our microfilm for each county. So you need to check this database. You go to our website, archives.alabama.gov, and then you will search our collections. Once you click on search our collections, there we go. Which is on the left-hand side of the screen. It'll take you to another screen where you can see all of our collections that are available and the different ways to access them. What you're looking for is the county records on microfilm, and if you click on that, it will take you to this page, and you'll type in the name of the county that you're looking for, that your ancestor lived in or was born in or died in. You'll search for that county and it'll bring up a list. Now, this is just a tiny piece of what we have for Autauga County, which is what I'm using here for my example. So you'll be able to scroll through the list and see what kinds of records we have available for Autauga County or whichever county you're looking for. And record type is kind of where you're looking. That gives you kind of an idea of like these are lists of registered voters. These are indexes from the Chancery Court. These are minutes from the Chancery Court. But once you find like the birth or death registers that you're looking for, you'll need to know the box location and the real number, or also known as the LGM number and the real number. And that way you can then go to the khaki cabinets in our research room and pull out your reel and go and stick it on one of our microfilm machines. And no worries, if you don't know how to do all this, when you come in, we're happy to help you get that process started. Okay, try not to take too long here. Let's see, we've got some records. So this is an example of one of the types of birth records that we have here at the archives. This is a later birth register from Bullitt County from 1929. So it has a lot more detail on it than some of the earlier birth registers. It has a space for the child's name. It gives, boy or girl, how many children the mother has had and what number this child is, and all this information about these children. So this list here on the right-hand side is records that are available prior to 1908. So I narrowed it down for you because if your person was born before 1908 or died before 1908, they are not going to have a birth or death certificate. No certificates available for them, no government records. unless they were in one of these counties. They might be listed in a birth or death register if that county had one. So again, now the earliest date I've seen for any of these counties for birth or death registers is 1881. So if they're prior to that, there's nothing in the government that proves there's a record. You'll have to look for family Bibles and church records and those kinds of things. But if they were born 1881 or later, there might be a birth or death register entry for them. And the later ones, they actually give the baby's name. So that's nice to know, because let me see. And one more thing. The dates of coverage vary for each county. Not all of them go back to 1881. And some of them don't start until like 1906. So it just depends. It varies, and sometimes there's gaps. So again, you'll want to check the database, the county microfilm database, to see like what years are available and if the county you're looking for has the birth and death registers. Again, if you don't see your county listed on here on this slide, we don't have it. And you'll have to either check with that county court or some other local archive maybe, and see if maybe they have copies if that county had anything, or it's very likely that county never had any kind of birth or death register. This is an earlier register. You'll notice there's no space for the child's name. They just give the date of birth, the sex, and the color of the child. Then you go on, you see like their place of birth, which this is in Franklin County. So beat 1, beat 10, beat 13. I have no idea what that means. I'm sure somebody in the county level might know what that means, but it probably doesn't match what it is today to what it was back then, because I'm sure beats change just as much as everything else. So good luck with that. There are some things that you might be able to do to figure that out, but I am not the expert in that field. But the register of birth, it gives the mother's name and her nativity, and of course her color as well. And then it also gives the father's name if it's available, their nativity, their occupation, and then there's an informant. And most of the time, in this case, the informant is a doctor or a midwife, or it could be the head of the family. I have not seen any entries for a birth register where the father or a clearly identifiable relative was the one who was the informant. But that doesn't mean that the informant couldn't have been the head of the family. I don't know. So this is 1904, Franklin County. You'll also notice that the top father's name listed there is illegitimate, and there's another one a little bit further down the way that's also listed as illegitimate. This actually happened a lot more often than you would think. So it looks like, the mother may have known who the father was, I would hope, but they were not listed in the birth register as being the father of the child. So that's what was chosen. So if you're trying to find the parents, you might be out of luck if you're trying to find the father's name in those cases, but that's just how they did things. Okay, one last document that we do have a few of. You notice that is a very small little list there of the counties that we have available on our microfilm. If you don't see your county, you might want to try contacting your county courthouse. Maybe their delayed birth certificates were never microfilmed, and so we don't have copies of them. This is an example. I'm going to use an example here again from Autauga County. Now, I'll let you know there are 49 delayed birth certificates in the delayed birth certificate book in the county courthouse at Autauga County, at least for the one that is microfilmed and that we have here on our microfilm. So there are multiple sections to these petitions for delayed birth certificates. You got this first section here where the person who is petitioning for their birth certificate fills out what they know about themselves and what they've been told to petition for their certificate. One of those certificates, the mother's name is different on the information that was filled out by the person. The father gives the testimony down at the bottom and says that the name of the mother is actually this, not that. And then, so on the actual decree, there's a different name for the mother on the actual birth certificate. So just make sure you look at all of the information on these. So this is where that person would fill that out. And then there's the testimonies from people, family members, friends who knew them either at the time of birth or were there at their birth, or had known them long enough to know, yes, this person was born at on this date. From what I know, or in this example here, Fanny is the sister of this man, and she says we have a Bible record that says that he is this age, that he was born August 24th, 1881. So that's pretty interesting there. So they were able to use those kinds of records to prove these things. This is the back of the page. In Autauga County, they have 2 pages. On the front and then the back, and then on the back there's a place for more testimonies, and then what you really want, is the decree establishing birth, because this is what tells you, okay, it's official, this person was born on this day to these people in this place. So again, in Autauga County, there are only 49 of these, and they're generally from like the 1940s, and the ages, the dates for, I think there was one from like in the 1870s that received a delayed birth certificate, but they're mostly, and then up to like, I think one was born in the early 20s. So because again, this guy was probably either trying to get a job in a field that he needed to prove his citizenship, or maybe he was already retired and trying to, I don't think he was 65. I haven't done the math, but if he was 65, maybe he was trying to get his Social Security benefits. But you'll notice also at the bottom of here, they are signed by the county probate judge. So check with your county probate judges if you're looking for delayed birth certificates and we don't have a copy for the county you're looking for. Probate judges might know where those records are. And so you're probably wondering, so why are there only 49 people that needed a delayed birth certificate if 1/3 of the country could not prove their citizenship? Well, also think about, not all women were working outside the home, so they may not have ever needed to prove who they were or how old they were, because I don't know. I'm not sure when they started asking to like prove your age for like a marriage license, but I imagine it was probably a little bit later than this. So think about that. And again, the actual birth decree is kind of what you're looking for there. To say, you know, that this is what they would have used to prove their birth. As in place of an actual birth certificate, so delayed birth certificate. And these are going to be for people who were, again, trying to prove their age, their citizenship, they were trying to get a job, that kind of thing. So there we go. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments and I'll try to answer what I can. Again, I've listed the websites here again at this last page. There are also links in the comments. But the CDC's Where to Write page is a really good resource. And then the Alabama Public Health Vital Records page is where you need to go if you need to get your records from, get a birth or death certificate from them. And then of course our website, if you want to check to see what we've got, what we might have for your county. So are there any questions? Okay, so how long has the law been in place that restricts access for 125 years? In the state of Alabama, that's been in place, I believe, if I remember correctly, it's since the inception of birth certificates, so since 1908. they decided that is what needs to be done. As far as I know, I don't think my research for that was a while ago. So I believe since 1908. It's been for quite some time for birth certificates. So yeah, you might be able to find copies somewhere else where like family members have a copy of someone's birth certificate or something like that. But getting them from the state, it's law 125 years. I wish they would at least update it to say that, a grandchild could get their birth certificate. If you could just prove that you're their grandchild, that would be really nice. If they would at least do that. So then you can have cause to ask for it. If you can prove your lineage to them. But I don't know, that might be too much work. I don't think there's ever been any kind of effort to change that law. Not that I've ever heard of. It would be a good idea. Maybe if we get enough genealogists to band together and start annoying their government legislators, their representatives or something. Maybe we can get the state legislatures in Alabama to say, hey, let's change this. At least let more people have access to it. Just send in some sort of documentation that says, hey, I am this person's grandchild or great grandchild. It only goes back to 1908. So I imagine grandchild or great grandchild would cover it. I would hope. I would think. So. Anything else? All right, then. I guess we'll call it a day then. I hope everyone enjoyed the history and access. Oh, adding a grandchild provision would be, yes. I would hope so. I would hope so. Yes. Well, my email is just my name, erica.eaves at archives.alabama.gov. It's also, you can find our emails on our website even. So. All right. Well, I guess we'll call it a day. Thanks for joining us, and I hope everybody enjoyed getting a little history lesson on birth and death certificates and why they became a thing and when they became a thing. And sadly, they didn't happen sooner in the way they are today. But that's why when you call and you try to get something and it's pre-1908, it's just really, really needle in a haystack of, are you lucky enough to get another option? So, we have another question. I'm searching for information from 1800s Fayette County. Should I contact a local library? I would contact a local library. They may have more information they'll most likely have more information than we will for that early, if it's early enough in the 1800s. Especially if it's prior to 1881, we likely don't have anything. So if it's prior to 1881, again, even early 1800s, prior to 1908, you're looking mostly for family Bibles, family records, family letters, church records. The church records we have are really unhelpful for genealogists as far as establishing people's birth dates. So just a heads up for that. Our church records aren't very useful for that, but if a local county library might have a collection, or if you can find a local church and you know that the family went to that, they might have something that you can use as well. But yeah, I would contact local libraries, the local county courthouse, maybe a local historical society. our local genealogical societies may have something that are helpful as well. So unfortunately, we aren't that helpful when it goes too far back as far as genealogy and our original records. So anything else? Proving you're a grandchild. Having the documentation to show that you yourself are your parent's child, and then that your parent is that person's grandchild, that person's child. So that would prove that you are their grandchild. So if you had your own birth certificate, I guess, it proves you are this person's child, and then that your parents is the child of your grandparents. So the records, you may need to look at marriage records for your parents, your grandparents, and census records. Census records can be helpful if it goes far enough back, at least for your grandparent, to show that your grandparent was maybe living in the same area or something. Unfortunately, we will have access to the 1950 census records starting next year. So sometime next year. It might be late next year by the time we're like really accessible. But yeah. Okay. I guess that's all. And I hope everybody enjoyed this little history and how to get to birth and death certificates. And that's all. Have a good day.